I have to pause for a moment and reflect because today is episode 200. Now, if you would have told me a few years ago when I launched this podcast that I would hit episode 200, I would not have believed you. When I started, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I wanted to accomplish. But because a close friend of mine inspired me to launch a podcast, I thought I would try it out. Little did I know what this podcast would become. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to interview some incredible guests. I've heard from many of you, the listeners, telling me how much this podcast has meant to you. I am so thankful. I'm so grateful. I will make sure to celebrate later today. I'll be taking my family out to dinner and focusing on what has happened in the last few years because of the podcast. So thank you, thank you, thank you. This episode that you're about to listen to is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a flip the script episode because instead of me interviewing someone will be interviewing me. And that person is G.T. Freeman. He runs the Lincoln Center, and it is the TLC Connections podcast. I will make sure to have links in the show notes where you can click and you yourself can listen to the TLC Connections podcast. This podcast is one of my favorite podcasts. I've listened to most of the episodes. Absolute incredible job that GT and his team does with this. There have been multiple episodes that I've listened to that I've teared up. There's been multiple episodes that I've listened to and I've laughed. I've learned so much from listening to their podcast. It was an absolute honor and privilege to be on, to come into their studio and sit down with GT. Enjoy this episode. And I started to obsess over what the great leaders of our time did to connect with their audiences. And there was one reoccurring theme. They were all masterful storytellers.
On this episode of TLC Connections, G.T. Freeman sits down with Matt Zahn, speaker, strategist, and founder of Stories with Traction. Matt works with leaders across industries to help them communicate more effectively, not through data dumps or directives, but through stories that build trust, spark emotion, and drive meaningful change. G.T. and Matt explore what it means to lead with authenticity, science behind story-based influence, and why the most powerful leaders aren't the ones who talk the most, but the ones who connect best. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I have always had a tremendous amount of respect for you, GT, what you do here at the Lincoln Center. So it is an absolute honor and privilege to be here today.
Yeah, we've known each other for a while now.
3 years.
Has it been that long? 3 years? Yeah.
Multiple years.
And you helped us actually create this space, and we're going to talk about podcasting and your expertise there a little bit later.
Sure.
But right before we get started, I understand that you just gave 4 talks in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So obviously we're in Pennsylvania. What took you to North Carolina? Was it a client? Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of work in North Carolina. It's a major business hub now. As you know, Raleigh, Charlotte, Winston-Salem, there's so many businesses moving there, people moving there, that it's just an incredible business hub. I've given many, many talks down in the North Carolina area. So like I had mentioned, I was there last week in Winston-Salem. Great people, great barbecue, great atmosphere. So I love going down to North Carolina.
Yeah. And what were the talks on?
On strategic storytelling. So primarily focused on how to get leaders, just giving them tools, giving them strategies on how they could be better storytellers.
Storytelling. So first of all, why don't you define that?
Sure.
It's pretty self-explanatory. Why don't you define it? And talk about how important it is to, say, business leaders.
Sure. It's a great question. So I think a lot of business leaders need to reframe their understanding of what storytelling is. So whenever you say that word storytelling, people have different images in their mind. So some people might think of kids sitting on the ground being read a bedtime story, or they might think of like a movie production where you need to dazzle the audience. And that is not what we're talking about in the context of business.
Okay.
So in the context of business or a nonprofit or any organization for that matter, it's taking an experience that leader or maybe one of their team members has gone through and sharing it in a story form. And there's a different structure I like to go through as far as storytelling is concerned, but it's basically sharing an experience that person's gone through to really create like a bridge almost, right? The bridge is something that takes someone from where they are to where they could be. So it's really getting that person to see themselves in the story that you're sharing. So I primarily work with a lot of C-suite executives, a lot of CEOs, a lot of sales-focused organizations, marketing teams, a lot on company culture as well. There's been a major shift since COVID regarding culture, right? How do you get organizations back on board because of what COVID did to different organizations? So I talk to a lot of companies as it relates to that.
Okay, so talk a little bit about like the steps of storytelling. Like, is there I'm assuming there's like an opening, a hook, and then there's like a body, and is it follow like a paper? I mean, talk a little bit more about like the construct of the story. Yeah. What makes a good story?
Great question. All right. So I'll give you like a simplistic but powerful formula that I walk everyone through. So first you need a foundation.
Okay.
The foundation is an emotion. Okay, so I want everyone to think about specific emotions that people might have and use that as the building block to create a story. And there's multiple emotions. In fact, Brené Brown's done extensive research on this. There's over 100 emotions that the human mind can experience. Okay. But there's really only a few dominant emotions that we experience on a day-to-day basis that are really relatable and really good material for building stories, right? Okay. So fear is one of them. Yep. Excitement is another one, right? So I work with a lot of leaders on identifying different topics under those emotions. So let's say I'm trying to get someone ready to speak to their entire company, right? A lot of CEOs, they go, and some of them will do these town hall events for their entire company. What on earth do they say? So they figure out what they're gonna talk about, just from a topic perspective, and then you peel back layers according to that emotion. Okay, so let's say that they wanted to talk about company culture. They wanted to bring people together. What separates our culture from someone else? Right. Well, a good place to start would be the emotion of excitement, right? So what brings you excitement when you think of your culture? You would list out every single topic that brings you excitement. So now you go from staring at a blank sheet of paper, not knowing what you might say, to now you would have multiple topics as it pertains to excitement. Once you have those topics, then you can start honing in and identifying the specific topic you might want to focus on. Once you identify that topic, you ask yourself, what's the ordinary world? What's the new reality? Because if you think of any great movie you've seen or any fantastic book you've read, there's a transition point. Okay. And we love those struggle victory stories. Someone working really hard, not breaking through, and then they break through. Ordinary world, new reality. So what's the ordinary world your team was in? What's the new reality they're in now based on something that you've done? Then you focus on the character development. And I always recommend when we are heaping praise on a certain character in our story, that character cannot be us. It has to be someone or something else. So this could be a team member. This could be a client. This could be a patient, where basically you're heaping praise on them, and then you start building out the story. I think a lot of people do themselves a disservice by focusing on, the opening, because we've all heard stories have a beginning, middle, and end. That is the most agonizing way to get a story out of you, right? Because there's no foundation. So we focus in on the foundation, and then we can add the opening. Then we can add the conclusion. But it really starts with that solid foundation.
Yeah. So you mentioned the foundation is often like an emotion, and you mentioned fear. Of course, when I think of fear, I think of the number one fear, according to most surveys, and it is public speaking. So you're a public speaker in addition to a coach and a storyteller. Do you still get afraid today when you are a little nervous or anxious when you have to get up in front of a big crowd and speak?
Great question. So it's actually hysterical that we are having this conversation today with this incredible podcast studio and what I do full time. I had a major fear of public speaking. To the point where not only in my worst nightmares could I have never fathomed doing any kind of public speaking, which is funny because that's what I do today, but I couldn't even connect with someone one-on-one comfortably. I had so much social anxiety, it was mentally paralyzing. And that was for years. So the fact that I do what I do today is just absolutely hysterical to me. So yes, the answer is yes. I had a very heightened sense of terror as it pertained to public speaking. Do I get nervous today? At times, yes. mean, if the audience is an audience that I'm not used to speaking to, if it's different topics that I'm kind of deviating from, but we really need to lean into the excitement, right? If we have the Winter Olympics coming up, and I think it's really exciting when you hear the interviews, because it's very rare that someone will say, I'm really nervous. They'll say, I'm excited. They've learned to have that perspective shift, lean into the excitement. Right. So I view it as a gift. Like when you get those butterfly feelings in your stomach, you kind of lean in and say, I'm really excited right now because I'm really interested in offering tremendous value to this audience. How can I lean into that excitement and use it as fuel?
So take me on a journey. When did you, this social anxiety that you were talking about, I'm assuming that was middle school, high school, or even young adult. And then at that point, I'm assuming you weren't thinking, hey, one day I'm going to be a public speaker. Like, tell us how that transition happened. Yeah. When did you know you wanted to be in front of crowds, tell stories and helping others tell stories?
Yeah. So I was working for a particular politician, and this individual, I was really focused on policy. I love doing research. I love sitting behind my computer, not working with other people, right? Because again, I had a lot of...
Just context, this is in your 20s?
Yeah, early 20s. Yeah, so I'm working for this particular politician. Okay. And I was working on specific policy initiatives that he had. Okay. And I was so excited about all these different ideas and really helping this individual out. Right. And I remember going into his office. I remember him saying to me, hey, what you're doing looks really good. Now I need you to help me sell it. Okay. And I always wanted to be the person behind the computer, not out in front of people. Right. So my initial thought was, you didn't hire a sales rep. What do you mean I need to sell this? He said, well, getting buy-in from people is what matters, Matt. Like, you need to help me sell this. He said, there's a group of people that are meeting in a couple of days from today. I can't make the meeting. I have another obligation. So I need you to go and speak on my behalf. And then he prepped me by saying, but I want you to be aware that people at this event are completely and entirely opposed to all the initiatives that you're working on. And what's more, they hate me. Wow. So more than likely, death by association, they're going to hate you too. Wow. I choose your words very
And this
carefully.
is your first
This is my first larger talk. Wow. Okay. So to say that I had nerves is an understatement. I couldn't sleep leading up to this meeting. I mean, I thought of every scenario in my mind that can go wrong. And part of me wishes that I could sit here and tell you that I overinflated it in my mind. It wasn't as big of a deal. Right. It was an absolute disaster. Disastrous. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. I mean, everything that can go wrong went wrong. And I remember after this event was over, I rushed out to my car. I slammed the door, and I'm looking in my rearview mirror, and I yelled, that'll never happen again. I don't know what it's going to take, but I'm going to learn how to share a message. Right. This moment, it was my big aha moment, and it sparked an obsession in me. And I started to obsess over what the great leaders of our time did to connect with their audiences. Yeah. And there was one reoccurring theme. They were all masterful storytellers. Okay. So basically what I did was I did relentless research, and I started figuring out, okay, what does this person do? What does that person do? And because I already had political connections at that time, I started doing speech writing for different candidates and elected officials. And then that transitioned into debate prep. So I did a lot of debate prep for years, and town hall preparation, press conference preparation. And then one thing, eventually it launched my business with what I do now. But that's pretty much the crux of it.
Let me ask some clarifying questions. Number one, speech writing to public speaking. Typically, those are two different things. You either like and really enjoy one or the other. Where did the passion start for you? Was it in writing, or was it in speech writing? Like, where was that initial spark? Yeah. In your 20s?
So I felt like I couldn't teach someone to do something if I had not done it myself. Okay. And that was really big for me, because I could sit behind a computer and I could type away, or I could start writing things. But I feel like if I couldn't figure out how to be engaging, it was very difficult for me to help someone else. Got it. And at this time, I had tremendous fear. So I actually gamified this process. I think gamification in business or whether someone works for a nonprofit, I think it could be very helpful, right? So because when you create games, it's very motivating.
Right.
So the gamification to me was like gamified embarrassment, where I literally set a goal to how many times can I embarrass myself each week? Okay. So I had a whiteboard and I whiteboarded this whole thing out that every week I'm going to do something that is going to embarrass myself. So everything from talks in different environments that I had no business being in. I remember doing a motivational talk to an improv comedy. It was just an open mic improv comedy event. I ended up doing comedy for quite some time. I'm actually not the funniest person in the world, which is hysterical to me because I'm not that funny. But I was the weak link in that chain, which caused tremendous embarrassment for years and years. I was under bright lights and in front of sold out audiences and just messing up and fumbling.
You were doing this intentionally?
I was doing this intentionally. I wanted to embarrass myself.
Embarrass yourself.
Yeah, so the intention and the idea behind it is if I can take myself through as much embarrassment as possible, when I get up in a room full of whether it's politicians or CEOs, that's going to be way easier.
Got it.
And this theory proved to be correct because after years and years and years of doing this, when I started transitioning into business, it became much, much easier to connect with audiences. And because I had been on so many stages leading up to that, I had rep after rep after rep after rep. I mean, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of moments of embarrassment over the course of multiple years. So by the time I launched my business in 2019, I was in so many different audiences that it didn't faze me as much going in front of CEOs.
The content that you were delivering in front of it. So again, going back to the kind of the writing and the speaking component, were you were writing all this content as well?
Yes.
Yeah. So back to that original embarrassing moment that you had with the politician, you wrote the speech, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So you knew the content.
Very well.
Yeah. And so
so I couldn't hide from it.
Right.
Because these people didn't like it. Right. So I couldn't hide from it.
Right. So I guess talk a little bit about the connection between the content on words, the story in words on a piece of paper, and then how do you then like translate that into the spoken word? Is there a process that you go through to take it from written form to speech form? Tell us a little bit about the preparation process, I guess, for delivering from going from content written down to delivering like a big speech.
Yeah, great question. So, and also I do want to back up and I want to mention to everyone listening, you can have an average story, an average mediocre story that it's okay, but it can come to life with good delivery. So you can take an okay story and it can be exceptional based on how it's being delivered. So what you had mentioned, taking it from paper actually to bringing it to life, a lot of that goes back to stage dynamics, right? How do you actually get on stage and connect with an audience? And that was what I was training through this whole process that I was doing. And if you look at musicians, they're incredible at this. I mean, there's multiple musicians. I mean, we could talk about Freddie Mercury. We can actually even talk about Taylor Swift, right? There are multiple moments if you watch what they did to connect with their audience. Everything's intentional. The way they hold their mic in their hand and they're looking out at the audience and they look in a certain direction, all of it's intentional. And I learned this through all these different reps. So there's multiple things that go into it. There is the delivery in of itself, right? How are you presenting yourself physically? Like how is eye contact? So we need to be really good at eye contact, voice fluctuation. Do you get louder at certain parts and do you get really quiet at certain parts? So all of that's based on the
stage
delivery.
presence, like where you are, like
100%.
So was there any training there or you just said, hey, I'm just gonna put myself out there and I'm gonna learn the hard way?
You learn the hard way.
Yeah.
There's
probably companies out there that could help you with that, I'm assuming. You stated that you were afraid of early on of getting in front of a crowd, yet you made a decision to intentionally put yourself out there. What was the driving motivation behind that?
Yeah, great question. So I get my drive from my father.
Okay.
My father had an incredible work ethic. I work with high achievers, right? So I've worked with some people that have done exceptional things. I'm yet to find someone that worked as hard as my father. My father was absolutely relentless. So to give you a glimpse into my world,
from my earliest memory, which was right around 4 years old, to 11. And I remember it was 11 because my father got injured when he was 11, so it stopped. But from 4 to 11, my father was involved in Ironman triathlons.
Oh, yeah. I know
and
this.
then he started doing double Ironmans. So for anyone that's not familiar with a double Ironman, you swim 5 miles, you get out of the water, you bike 224 miles, and you get off your bike and you run 50 miles.
Okay.
So it's a 2-day event. It's one of the most grueling athletic feats a human being can do. And that's what my father did. So I remember when I was a young boy, in the morning, that was my father's run time. He would run for hours and hours and hours. And then he went to work, and he worked at a steel company. So it was a very physically demanding job. He came home, and that was his bike time. So my father had a stationary bike, and he was very handy. He built a wooden box around it and put a table on that wooden box. I remember playing checkers with my father on this table. I remember eating on this table as my father would bike and he would train. And then Saturday was a swim day. He swam all Saturday. So basically, and I don't think at any point in my life, my father said to me, Matt, you need to have a good work ethic. He demonstrated that for me. So my father, basically, if you had an idea that popped into your head, you could make it a reality based on just going for that and just making it a reality. So when I started working with these politicians and I wanted to help them so bad, I wanted to be as good of a speaker as I possibly could. And I don't think I sat down and I said to myself, I'm just going to make it happen. That was just part of my DNA. That was part of my background. That was part of who I was, my story. So I just went after it at all costs.
Yeah. So in going after it, you said you did a lot of research. In that research, do you recall any specific storytellers, speakers that really jumped out as this person is really, really good and you wanted to kind of emulate or model after?
Yeah. I went through a lot of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, and I couldn't figure out how on earth could this individual connect with people the way he did. And I did a lot of research, and I read a lot of books on it, and it wasn't until – so I've been to where MLK was assassinated, the exact location in Memphis, and I've been to where he was born in the Atlanta area. And I've literally stood where he was born. He was born in his childhood home. And it wasn't until I went to his home that I realized what he was able to do. So MLK was willing to jump without a net. And he actually jumped out of his second story childhood home. And he got severely injured. It was a 3-story building, and there was a spiral staircase. He actually jumped down the staircase. So it was part of who he was to just jump without a net. So when he would stand up and he would give these incredible speeches, someone could share something with him as he's walking up onto that podium. And he could take it from the first moment that he heard it, and he could use it as a way to inspire an audience. He wasn't held back by the idea of, well, what if I mess up? What if I say something that offends someone? What if? He just focused on the task at hand, which was him speaking. And I think that was really interesting to me that someone could do that. And I tried to replicate the idea of not worrying as much about what people thought of me, just getting those reps in. So I think that was an individual that I could step back at, because there's some talks that he did that were just amazing. Like you listen to these talks and you're like, that's like supernatural almost, how someone could whip audiences into frenzies based on what he was saying. Yeah. Like, how do you do that? Well, you have to be willing to jump without a net.
Yeah. So you've been to these places. So obviously that was very impactful. Like you've then later as an adult, you visited all these places to kind of even learn more about. I mean, that's fascinating. I did not know that. Let's go a little bit further on MLK then. When I think of some of the famous speeches, I think of like the cadence of his voice, almost like a preacher. Well, of course, he was a preacher, right?
Sure.
So how important is that? And then what's more or less important? What are the characteristics that made MLK fantastic speaker?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned cadence, right? So he had a motivational element to him. I mean, he could have been a motivational speaker in his own right? He was able to really motivate people. Yeah. So that cadence of speech was really important, how he focused in on certain power words, okay? Yeah. And without mentioning names, so we don't go through, into the political arena too much, there are certain politicians that really focus on the power behind their words. Right. So there's a major emphasis and an oomph, if you will, behind these different words. And MLK was masterful at that. He really focused in on that. Okay. Not everyone does that. So I recommend to anyone listening, focus in on the strength that you have. Okay. Right. So there's certain leaders that they lean into body language, right? So you'll see people, they use really big as far as the way they're using their body, gestures, and they create they're almost part of the show, if you will. Right. So really big gestures, they take up the space. Some people focus on that cadence of speech, like you mentioned. So some speakers will speak one word per second increments. So there's a lot more power behind the word. There are some individuals that are just really good at bringing other people up with them. So like figuratively bringing people on stage and then vicariously speaking through them. Right. There's a lot of politicians that are really good at that. They actually shield themselves from debate by doing that. Right. Because if I figuratively bring my wife up here with me and I say something, if you have a disagreement with it, you're not going to say, Matt, you're wrong. You have to be willing to attack my wife, right? A lot of people aren't willing to do that. So there's a lot of different techniques and different strengths that people can lean into. And one of the things that I hear so many people say, and it's really disheartening to me because they don't understand what they're saying, is they'll say, I went on YouTube and I heard this person speak and I could never talk like that. Mm. And my response was always the same. It's great. That's not your skill set. That's not your strength. Don't talk like that. Lean into your strengths. Right. You might see an incredible TED Talk, and that person, the way they've structured that talk, the way they present themselves is not you. Right. So lean into the strength that you have. Yeah, that's interesting. When I think of speakers, I think of TED Talks. I think of like Simon Sinek and others, and in front of 20,000 people with this little what do you call it? The flip chart. The circles, drawing the circles and the flip chart. And it is kind of human nature to say, well, I could never do that. And so, no, that's a good reminder. So, so you mentioned MLK. That is like an influencing figure early on. Is there anybody today that, to your point, we don't want to necessarily emulate them, or because you want to have your own kind of brand? But is there anybody today, a modern day speaker, that is not the equivalent of MLK, but someone who's just as a powerful speaker today? Can you think of anybody? That I say to myself, wow, I could really follow after them. Yeah. So I would actually, and this is not going to be anyone knows that's listening to this podcast, but this is just for me personally, it would be my grandfather. Okay. He was really good at storytelling. He was an incredible person. He was one of my biggest heroes in life. He was a World War II veteran. He actually lost half his hand during a combat mission. He received his Purple Heart for it. And just the way he would share stories. Now, I was very young, right? So I wasn't watching him thinking, oh, one day I'm going to be this speaker and I'm going to learn what he does. Yeah. But he was just so good at connecting with other people. He would have, whether it was a dinner, and he would invite people from the neighborhood and family. He just really could connect with everyone in that room. And because of the Great Depression having such an impact on him, and because he was raised in such poverty, he had this incredible ability to connect with people. He had so much empathy that it didn't matter if someone was a janitor or they were the CEO, he could connect with that person. And that really stuck with me. So did that storytelling then pass from your grandfather to your father and then to you? Is that where that initial spark for storytelling came from, you think? Was your grandfather? Not from him. Yeah. I mean, my grandfather was the one that inspired me to get involved in politics in the first place. Okay. He was very focused on working with leaders that had courage, had integrity. We had numerous conversations where he wanted me to get involved in politics. There's a particular moment that I will never forget. It's one of the last conversations I had with my grandfather. So as I had mentioned, he fought during World War II. Yeah. He did some incredible things for people that were next to him that I won't go into, right? He was very, very, he didn't share all the details of the gore and everything that went on, but he did some incredible things for those around him. And I'll never forget, I was sitting at his dining room table and he looked at me and he said, Matt, what did I fight for? And I was just so taken back by his question. So I asked him to repeat himself. He said, what did I fight for? And then he went on to say, did I fight so our leaders could argue, bicker, and complain and get nothing done? Is that what I fought for? And then I remember him slamming his hand on the table. And he said, no, I fought so every man, woman, and child, regardless of what they will do, can live in a free and just nation. That's what I fought for. And it was during this conversation that he inspired me that every morning I wake up, I need to ask myself, what am I fighting for? And I would quickly recognize that people are always worth fighting for.
Okay, how old were you at that point?
So I was in my early 20s at that point. So this is like, and this is right around the time he died soon after this conversation. But what was interesting is the months leading up to his passing, he implored me to get involved in politics. He really wanted me into, and I think he saw different things in me that he didn't see in other individuals in the family. Not that I was special, but I had an element of curiosity to me. I was really curious about him, what he went through in the war. He actually gave me his Purple Heart before he passed away. He said, I want you to have it. You know, you're going to value this and respect it more than anyone else. So it's actually sitting in my office. And it was him that he really inspired me to get into the political arena. Now, I didn't dive in with the way that he would have wanted because, again, I had major social anxiety. So it took me quite some time to get to the point where I feel that I could actually honor my grandfather the way that he would want.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. You mentioned you have a company. So tell me, from politics to getting all the reps in, becoming a speaker, then at what point did the business launch? You said 2019?
2019.
Yeah. Talk about that pivotal point. It's like right before COVID.
Yeah. A great time to dive into being a speaker in person with other people. Right. Yeah. So I worked my guts out in 2019. Like, just because I launched my business, I was working incredibly hard. I filled up my calendar 2020. And then we know what happened.
Wow.
Early on in 2020, I remember where I was. I was sitting on my couch and I got a text, and then I got a phone call. And I got another phone call, cancellation, right? We got to cancel this event. We got to cancel this event. And I was like blown away because I had just worked really tough to fill up my calendar for 2020. And then I had to transition. So I transitioned to a lot of virtual things. And 2019 and 2020 was a lot of virtual coaching, a lot of virtual talks. And then 2021, things skyrocketed. That's when things just kind of exploded for me.
So from 2021 to now, tell me about the day in the life of Matt Zahn. Like, what does a typical day look? What does a typical week look like? I guess I'm assuming you're a road warrior.
Yeah, so not as much as I used to. So I was on the road about 3 times, so 3 weeks out of each month, and which was a lot. I have 3 little kids, 11, 10, and 7, so it was very difficult. So I've scaled it back. So I'll do 1 to 2 weeks on the road a month, which I feel like it's manageable. So, and I also do a lot of virtual coaching as well. So I can sit in the comfort of my home office and do different things. But a typical week would be, I like to fly into a particular city, let's say on a Monday, and then I like to do back-to-back talks. So I'll do as many talks as I can, and then I will fly home. I'll get home either Thursday or Friday. And I do a lot of, I primarily focus on workshops. I do keynotes as well, but I like doing these 3-hour intensive workshops.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about the content of these workshops and or the keynotes, and who your typical client audience is.
Yeah, so I dive into the elements of strategic storytelling. I'm really big on story banks. So I call building a systematic documentation approach to one's stories. I call it a story bank, right? Having different story banks, and different organizations can set up all kinds of different story banks. That's what I focus on in the workshop. Right. So if you are a leader of a company, I like to have a staff meeting story bank for you. So what are you sharing at a meeting to inspire your team to take the actions that they should be taking? There's sales story banks that you can set up, marketing story banks. There's onboarding story banks. There are hiring story banks. So for someone that is engaged in bringing new team members on, what kind of stories are they sharing during the interview process? So that's what I focus in on from a just the strategic storytelling workshop perspective. So, and that typically is a half day event, right? So 3-4 hours would be the workshop as it pertains to that. A lot of CEOs, so CEOs, VPs, people in decision maker seats. And I think the structure and the systematic approach to it is what it's just people gravitate towards that. There's a lot of workshops that you can go through on the dynamics of speaking and delivery. And we kind of touched a little bit on that. Like there are workshops people can go through for that. This is more like the systematic approach to the stories you have. There's a lot of leaders out there that they are storytellers naturally, right? A lot of people wouldn't get into the decision-making seats that they're in if they didn't have some element of a communication skill set. Right. I'm asking them to add a structure to it, add a systematic approach to it. And that's where the Story Bank comes in. And my book that launched last year is called The Story Bank, right? Where I dive into a lot of different elements of how people can implement this.
So again, going back to what I was mentioning earlier about content on paper versus speaking. So you go back and forth. So you went from speech writing to public speaking, but then you had time to go back and write a book, right? So what was that process like? What was the impetus for that, or the desire for that? And then talk a little bit more about the book.
Yeah. It was not a fun process, not in any way, shape, or form. Right. Yeah. So the way that, in my opinion, based on what I've experienced, I really do feel like launching a book has changed, especially as it pertains to the culture of the world we're in today. Right. And when I was starting to get into the speaking world, I linked up with an organization called the National Speakers Association, so NSA. We would always make the joke, we're the ones that talk, not the ones that listen, right? Okay. So NSA. And there's chapters all around the country. Right. And I was highly engaged in the Philadelphia chapter for a couple of years. I'm not as much anymore. But one of the things that a lot of speakers that launched their businesses in the 90s would say is launch a book and then become a speaker. Launch a book and then become a speaker. That has been flipped on its head recently because of social media. So today you can build an audience and then launch a book. Right. So the idea was, instead of me sitting down and focusing on this book for like a year, where like I'm intensely focused on this, what if I drip it out like a marketing drip campaign? Yeah. What if I focus on articles and I start just putting out pieces of content? And that's what I did for years. So I would set a goal on, I'm going to write 50 articles. And then the next year, I'm going to do this.
So these are like blog articles?
Correct.
Blogs. Okay.
Yeah. On specific elements to storytelling.
Got it.
Now, I used LinkedIn as my social media platform of choice just because of the type of people that are on there. They're there for business. A lot of executives are on LinkedIn. So I started putting all this content out on LinkedIn, and I started to build a decent following, a decent audience. That was also really helpful as it pertained to speaking, because I would get messages from people, hey, can you talk to my organization out here? Can you do this? Right. It literally changed the game for me as it pertained to business. I would get a lot of requests through LinkedIn. So after years and years and years of putting a lot of articles out and content pieces out, then the process was, how do you stitch it together in book form? And that's when there was a whole process of, okay, what needs to be next? What needs to be focused on? And I learned that there are a lot of things that I was talking about that had to be on the chopping block, that just, it wasn't relevant to what I wanted to put out in the world through book form. There were very specific things. And then once I identified those, then I would focus in on the content pieces as it pertained to those specific things. Got it. So it was quite the refining. It wasn't me sitting down writing a book from start to finish. That was not at all how this process looked like.
Is there a book 2 in the works? Probably not.
Not right now. Okay. Not right now. Now I'm focusing on still the book launch and getting it out into multiple people's hands.
So you mentioned coaching as well. So talk a little bit about your coaching services. Yeah. Yeah. And typical client, your C-suite typically. Yeah. Okay. And so probably a lot of synergy then with the speaking as well.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. A lot of C-suite executives that want to get up in front of their teams. They want to be more vibrant. They want to connect, or they want to speak at a conference, building out the talk forum. Here's what you do. And that's really what I would focus on in that regard.
So you're gone, or there in the beginning, you were gone 3 to 4 weeks, 3 weeks out of a month, and now 2 weeks out of a month for 4+ years. I haven't done the math, but that's a lot of talk, and typically 2 or 3 in the same city that same week. Is it fair to say probably thousands of talks that you've given, or
maybe several hundred? I don't know if I hit the thousands.
So any particular crowd that was really tough that you remember?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
As bad as that crowd when you were in the 20s doing the political speech?
Yeah. So, I would even say more so.
Wow.
Early on in my speaking career, I spoke to a particular organization. But after the talk was over, and here's what's interesting. So I'll share with you what happened the week prior to that. But after the talk was over, the gentleman that brought me in looked at everyone in the audience and said, let's go around the room and tell Matt what he did wrong.
What?
So they proceeded to go around the room and share with me everything that they thought that I did wrong with the talk. And I felt so humiliated. I felt like this big. Now, here's what's interesting about this. And I'm sharing this for a reason. I'm not sharing this to brag or toot my own horn. I'm sharing this because there's a very specific point that I want your audience to grab a hold of. This was out in the Orange County, California area that this talk took place. A week prior, I was speaking in Seattle, and I was the main keynote speaker at a conference out in Seattle. And the people at this event loved my talk. They were on board. I got just awesome praise over the talk. And it was almost the exact same thing. It was just the people that had changed. And I mention that because often people, they get really flustered based on what a particular person or group of people might say. It wasn't necessarily the talk that was wrong. It was just the audience didn't like what I was saying. So I've started to view it just based on a math equation, right? There's a big difference between an opinion and feedback, like legit feedback. And I've learned that, right? An opinion is someone saying something they might not like about you. I don't like that you wear blue shirts, right? That's an opinion. Legitimate feedback to me is when I start to hear it again and again and again, maybe I need to tweak it. So early on, I had a specific handout that I would give out, and people regularly ask me to add more meat to the handout, make sure that there's more pages. So, okay, that's legitimate feedback that I can take. But if someone says, oh, I really didn't like the way that you opened that one story, if I only hear that once and no one else says that, that's just an opinion. That's not like legitimate feedback that I should take and run with it. So I viewed it now as what's the math behind it? Meaning if I get up and I give 10 talks and 9 talks went exceptionally well, people were on board and they liked it, to me, that would be a win.
The flip question is, do you, in these hundreds of speeches over the last 3 or 4 years, any of them that you thought, wow, that was really good, I should capture this moment? Like you felt particularly proud, maybe because of the audience or the content?
Yeah, the audience. I think I feel really good when I get a message from someone that went through one of my talks years ago. So this recently happened. I spoke in Chicago 4 years ago to this one business. And recently, like within the last couple weeks, a gentleman in that audience reached out to me and said, hey, I just want to let you know I'm still using what you had gone through today. It meant a lot to me. So that makes me feel really good.
Right.
But to answer your question about like, is there a particular moment? One of the beauties of the speaking world is like you speak in really nice areas. Like when you go to a conference, they're at locations and they might be a nice retreat area. So I've been to some pretty incredible places with just beautiful scenery. I have a goal right now to speak in all 50 states. Okay. I calculated recently I'm at 36, so I'm on my way. I've spoken in Alaska. I've spoken in pretty much every corner of California, Oregon, Washington State. Some beautiful, Sedona, right? So there's some beautiful, beautiful locations where like you're speaking and you look out and it's just the most beautiful scenery that you can imagine. And those are the moments where I question, like, how did I get here? Like what is happening right now? So those are some pretty neat moments.
Yeah. So Matt, a couple more questions for you. So talk about, well, answer the question for those listeners who might be listening who want to become a public speaker. What would you advise them to do? Like, what are the first few steps?
So what's interesting to me is when you do something, so like when you do something day in and day out, you become an expert at that, but you're not fascinated by it. But other people might be fascinated by it. Right. So right now, you've done so many of these podcasts, right? You might not be fascinated by what you do, but you have the reps, right? So you can go out and GT, could teach other people how to be a great podcast host. And often when we're in our day-to-day, we need to get out of our day-to-day. So we need to ask ourselves, what am I doing day in and day out that someone else would find value in? And then once you identify that, then I recommend people focus in on a particular framework. Take me from start to finish on how you're able to do that. So maybe it's a 5-step framework. And then you could start building out a talk as it pertains to that framework. And then you need to figure out what kind of audiences, what kind of industries might be interested in this. Right? People tend to pay for if you can increase their wealth, if you can help them as it pertains to health, right? So a lot of organizations will pay if there's a return on investment for them. Right. And then you can start focusing on different companies. And I always recommend linking up with there's a lot of networking groups that you can link up with as it pertains to speaking. The National Speakers Association is one of them. Yeah. And then just make sure that you get up and have those reps, because there's two different elements to the speaking world. There's the craft of speaking, and then there's the business of speaking. Right. And they are radically different. You can be really good at baking cakes, but if you don't understand business, you'll be out of business pretty quick. You need to keep the lights on as you sell those cakes, right? So I think there are some incredible speakers that I've heard where I'm blown away, and they're just not able to make it in the speaking world because it's legitimately a business. So there's a business element. So the National Speakers Association can help people with the business element of speaking. And then I recommend the reps. Toastmasters is good to get reps in. Right. I always recommend improv comedy. So there's an outfit out in Chicago. It's called Second City. And then there was a spinoff from Second City called Comedy Sports. There's comedy sports all across the United States and a lot of major cities. So there's one in the Philadelphia area. Yeah. And Comedy Sports puts on trainings actually for different businesses where you can go, you can learn the elements of improv comedy. There's story slams that take place all over the country. So there was an organization out in New York City called The Moth. And then they started launching these, they're called story slams. There was one, if we're talking about our particular area, there was one in Philly, there was one in Westchester, there was one in Lancaster at one point. And this is just an opportunity that you can go. It's kind of nerve-wracking too, because what they'll do is they'll give you a topic, and then you get there, you put your name in a hat. You don't even know if you're going to be called on. So maybe the topic is the most embarrassing experience that's happened to you, right? So your name's in the hat, and there's multiple people that want to speak, and you get a 5-minute speaking slot. You might be picked, you might not be picked, and then you can get up and you would share that 5-minute story. And that's just, all of those are reps.
All getting your reps. So content reps, look for these community organizations. Matt, if the listeners want to learn more about you, where would they go? Obviously, you mentioned LinkedIn, and then the book. You have a website.
Sure. So storieswithtraction.com. My podcast is Stories with Traction. They can go on the website. They can get all the information about me, about my workshop, what I do. The book's available on Amazon. It's called The Story Bank, and you're welcome to look for me there.
Anything, thank you, Matt. Is there anything that I have not yet asked that you wish I had asked?
That's a great question. I know you're really into the connection points, right?
Yes.
Different connections.
Yes.
So I'll leave you with this. I'm going to share a story with you that I've never shared with anyone before. Okay. We're going to do it on the TLC Connections podcast. All right. Okay. So I don't have permission to share this story, so I'm actually going to change the name of this individual. Okay. And I won't mention the company because I don't have permission to share this. But this had a profound impact on me, and it changed the direction of my business, my mission, what I do. Okay. So I mentioned to you 2019 and 2020 were really difficult years. Okay, really difficult years to get my business up and running, especially with COVID. So in 2021, I landed a talk for a company in Memphis. The gentleman, the CEO that invited me to come out, I put this guy on a pedestal. Okay, I just thought he was the most amazing person, like someone that everyone in the business world would want to be like. Okay, so I had a ton of nerves to go out and especially deliver this talk to his entire company. So I fly into Memphis. And I get a phone call from him after I land, and he says, hey, can we go out for dinner? Because I want to go over like just different things that I want you to touch on with my team the following day. So I said, sure. And I'm in the hunt for the best barbecue in the country. So I want Memphis barbecue, right? So I said, in order to do that, we need to go to a little hole in the wall place. It's not going to be luxury for any stretch of the imagination, but I'll get you some good barbecue. So we go into it's a little dinky place. It reminded me of like being in someone's basement. Like we opened the door, we walked down to this, like it was like a cellar type area. It was like super tiny. And they gave you barbecue on a paper plate and you ate on a card table, right? So not a luxury restaurant, but it was some of the best barbecue I've ever had. And I'm sitting across from this gentleman. Now keep in mind, this guy, I put on a pedestal, a ton of respect for him. And we get through what we're going to go over the following day, what he wants me to really focus in on. And then after we get through the logistics of the talk, he looks at me and he says, how are you doing? How are you doing personally? And I said, Mark, I got to be honest with you, I'm not doing well. I said, recently my sister-in-law just died. She was an alcoholic and she drank herself to death. And I said, and it's been devastating for my wife and I. And he looks at me and he breaks down crying, like breaks down. Now I'm sitting at this table and I'm like looking around like, what did I say? Because I've shared this with other people and I did not get that reaction. He breaks down crying. And he says, Matt, he said, I've been an alcoholic for 20 years and it almost destroyed every aspect of my life, but I was able to get the help that I needed. He said, I'm so sorry that your sister-in-law wasn't able to make it out alive. And for an entire hour, he went through his entire story of redemption with me on how he destroyed everything from the first business that he had to his first marriage to every aspect of his life, his kids. And he broke down for me how he went through AA. He was able to get the help he needed. And he was completely able to change his life around. And after that event, I remember going back to my hotel room and I just sat in complete silence thinking like, what just happened? What just happened? Because I just had one of the most vulnerable, real, raw conversations with a human being that I've ever had before. And it dawned on me that here's a guy that I put on this pedestal, like he was what everyone wanted to be. I was sitting across from one of the most influential business leaders in Tennessee, and he was sharing with me how he completely devastated his life due to his addiction. And that changed the direction of my business, my mission, because I realized at that moment that every single person has an inferiority complex. Every person. And I've worked with some pretty amazing achievers, like high performing, really successful people, and everyone has an inferiority complex in some way, shape, or form. And it really just empowered me that it doesn't matter who the person is, they're going through something. And I tested this. This is right around the time that my business skyrocketed. So after this event took place, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go. It doesn't matter who the person is, what the company is. I'm gonna start banging down the door to get these taught. And then this conversation happened toward the end of 2021, and in 2022 things just skyrocketed. So I think that had that connection that I had, and that conversation had such an impact on me.
Wow, that's a powerful story, and we're a good reminder that at the end of the day we're all humans, just trying to get through. So I appreciate the radical vulnerability there. Matt, thank you for your time.
Definitely. Thank you.
All right.
TLC Connections is supported in part by the Lincoln Center for Family and Youth through education, counseling, coaching, and consulting. We empower people to make positive choices, meaningful connections, and transformational change. To learn more, visit thelincolncenter.com.